Okay, so let's unpack this. Picture walking down the hallway of a typical high school,
Okay, I'm picturing it.
and you see a teenager wearing a graphic T-shirt depicting a famous historical battle, specifically the story of Helaman's 2,000 Stripling Warriors from the Book of Mormon.
Right, a very familiar image for a lot of people.
Yeah, but the illustration on the shirt shows these warriors as like these muscle-bound WWE-style
Oh
bodybuilders.
yeah, the classic superhero treatment.
Exactly. We're talking totally shirtless, gleaming six-packs, biceps the size of tree trunks, just hoisting these massive weapons. And right underneath this hypermasculine imagery, the shirt affectionately labels them Mama's Boys.
Which is such a striking visual juxtaposition, honestly.
It really is.
And it perfectly encapsulates how we tend to treat historical narratives, like the sheer complexity, the human grit, and honestly, the traumatic reality of a historical moment just gets completely flattened out.
Yeah, we just gonna lose it all.
We do. We strip away the nuance and replace it with a comfortable, easily digestible myth. So we're left with these larger-than-life action figures rather than real human beings.
Which completely changes how we digest the actual history.
Wow.
I mean, when we look at the narrative of Helaman's young soldiers, this is from Alma chapters 53 through 63 in the sources we're using today, the contrast between our modern pop culture superhero depictions and what the text actually says is staggering.
It's almost a completely different story.
It really is. So our mission for this deep dive is to basically strip away that modern gloss. We
Yeah.
are going to dig into the startling, poignant reality behind these young soldiers, the intense trauma of their parents, and the incredibly complex, often heartbreaking nature of miracles.
Because there is so much more there than just a cool battle story.
Totally. Whether you are a lifelong student of this ancient text or you're hearing about it for the very first time today, there is a massive paradigm shift hiding in the timeline here, mostly about faith, trauma, and what it actually means to be delivered in a time of war.
And, to trigger that paradigm shift, we first have to dismantle that superhero image on the t-shirt you mentioned.
Right, we have to tear that down first.
Exactly.
Yeah,
We have to understand who these soldiers actually were physically and developmentally. And the key to unlocking their reality is right there in the specific 19th century terminology used to describe them, specifically the word stripling.
right. Because if you look at an 1828 Webster's Dictionary, which, by the way, is a perfect window into the language being used when this record's translated, the definition of a stripling paints a very different picture than a heavily muscled gladiator.
It really does. What does it actually say?
Well, it defines a stripling as a youth just passing from boyhood to manhood. And it shares a root with the word strip, meaning a tall, slender youth, someone who was just shooting up suddenly,
Exactly. We're talking gangly, lanky.
like arms and legs everywhere.
Yes. If we synthesize the chronological data across the historical timeline we have, we find that these soldiers were adolescents. They were likely anywhere between 12 and 16 years old.
Wow, 12 to 16.
Yeah, and the military commander who led them, Helaman, he repeatedly refers to them in the text as very young, or his little sons and a little band. I mean, we are clearly not talking about seasoned veterans here.
Wait, so Helaman wasn't leading a squad of hardened Navy SEALs into combat. He was essentially leading a middle school or like a junior high youth group into a brutally violent ancient war.
That is the reality of the text, yeah.
But how could a group of awkward, gangly 14-year-olds, who are probably still tripping over their own newly grown feet, possibly be a military advantage against a ferocious, experienced enemy army? That sounds like a complete tactical nightmare.
It sounds like a nightmare because it completely defies conventional military logic. But your shock is entirely justified, and honestly, it is exactly the point the text is trying to make.
Really? How so?
Because their advantage was never physical muscle. The text explicitly states they were young men of truth and soberness. If we connect this to the broader theological framework of the ancient world, it perfectly echoes the story of Gideon's army of 300 in the Old Testament.
Oh, I know that one. Where the Lord purposefully whittles Gideon's massive army down to a ridiculously small, totally inadequate number before they go to fight.
Precisely. And why does he do that?
So that when they win, the Israelites can't boast that their own moral strength or tactical brilliance saved them. The deliverance had to be undeniably divine.
Exactly. With the Stripling Warriors, their youth, their small numbers, and their sheer physical inexperience highlighted that their strength had to come entirely from a divine source.
Right. It couldn't have been their own biceps.
No, definitely not. They weren't strong in spite of being young. Their youth and vulnerability were the very things that made the miracle visible to everyone around them.
And that just reframes the entire narrative for me. But it also begs a massive psychological question.
Okay, what's that?
If these soldiers were just 12 to 16-year-old kids, where did they get this unshakable, battle-ready spiritual strength? I mean, a 14-year-old doesn't just naturally possess the psychological fortitude to stare down a veteran army.
No, they certainly don't.
So to figure out where that came from, we have to look at the incredible and honestly horrific backstory of their mothers.
We really do, and this is where the historical timeline becomes absolutely critical to our deep dive. These mothers were part of a group called the Anti-Nephi Lehis.
Okay.
Decades earlier, they were Lamanite converts who had made a solemn, binding covenant with God to never shed blood again. They went so far as to bury their weapons deep in the earth as a physical testimony of their total pacifism.
Which is a beautiful gesture of peace, but it had devastating consequences in the real world.
It triggered a horrific 15-year timeline of persecution. Because they refused to take up arms, even in self-defense, these converts were massacred.
Oh.
Not once, but twice. They were slaughtered by their unconverted brethren. The historical record describes them literally prostrating themselves on the ground, praising God, even as they were being actively killed.
That is just so hard to even picture.
It is. The violence became so severe that they were eventually forced to abandon their homelands entirely. They fled into neighboring Nephite territory as refugees, where they had to be protected by Nephite armies.
And here is the math that just stopped me in my tracks when I was putting this timeline together from our sources.
Let's hear it.
If the Stripling Warriors were roughly 12 to 16 years old when they went to fight, that means their mothers were pregnant, nursing, or raising toddlers while their people were being slaughtered and driven from their homes as refugees.
That is the crucial context that gets missed.
Just think about the psychology of that for a second.
Yeah.
How do you, as a mother, teach a 4-year-old child that God will deliver you when you have just watched your own family members be brutally murdered for refusing to fight?
Right.
How do you maintain faith in divine protection when your lived reality is a bloodbath?
Well, it requires an entirely different definition of the word deliverance. You see, these mothers were not passing down naive platitudes they learned in some peaceful, quiet Sunday school.
No, definitely not.
Their faith was forged in the crucible of extreme, agonizing trauma. They had lived through the absolute worst-case scenario, so when they taught their young sons that God would deliver them, they didn't mean God will ensure you never get hurt and that you survive physically.
Because they had seen firsthand, with their own eyes, that righteous people still die. Sometimes they die actually because they are righteous.
Exactly. They taught their sons a much deeper, more robust theology of deliverance. They taught them that deliverance meant preserving their religious liberty, ensuring there was a place where their community could freely worship.
That makes a lot of sense.
But most importantly, it meant trusting in an ultimate eternal victory over death. They believed that even if they died on that battlefield, they would be raised to dwell with God in a state of never-ending happiness. Their view of survival was eternal, not just mortal. They were preparing their sons not just for battle, but for eternity.
That is incredibly heavy. And I want to make sure we don't overlook the fathers here either, because it's easy to focus on the mama's boys angle on the t-shirt, but the fathers were not absent or uninvolved in this history.
That's a great point. They played a huge role.
Yeah, even though the fathers were bound by that strict covenant, not to shed blood, they didn't just sit in the background. They actively supported the war effort logistically. They gathered and transported provisions to the army.
It was a fully integrated community effort.
Exactly. The mothers contributed the profound spiritual instruction, the fathers provided the physical sustenance, and the sons offered their lives to protect the entire community.
It is a profound model of community resilience in the face of an existential threat. But, taking this deep, trauma-forged faith into account, we also have to look at how these young teenagers actually performed mechanically when they were facing a ferocious, experienced enemy on the battlefield.
Yes, because this is where the spiritual rubber meets the tactical road. There is this incredibly tense military maneuver detailed in the narrative. Helaman and his young troops are utilized as a decoy.
Right, a very dangerous position to be in.
Extremely dangerous. They are trying to draw the largest, most dangerous Lamanite army out of a stronghold city called Antipara. And it works. The massive Lamanite army comes out, and a grueling 3-day chase begins.
Just imagine the exhaustion.
You have to imagine the physical and psychological toll here. Helaman's young army is essentially running for their lives for 72 hours, hoping a Nephite commander named Antipas is catching up behind the Lamanites to trap them.
But then on the third day, the pursuing Lamanite army suddenly stops.
Right, and Helaman is completely in the dark. He doesn't know what's happening behind him. Did the Lamanites stop because Antipas finally caught up and engaged them from the rear? Or is this a tactical trap designed to get Helaman's small, inexperienced army to turn around and march straight into a slaughter?
It's a terrifying decision to make.
And this is where I just love Helaman's leadership. He doesn't just bark an order at his troops. He turns to these teenagers and asks them what they want to do.
He defers to them.
Yeah, it's like a head coach in the Super Bowl, down by 4 with the game on the line, turning to the youngest rookies on the team and asking them to call the final, most important play of the game.
It requires immense, almost reckless trust on his part. And the boys' response is legendary. They say, "God is with us, and he will not suffer that we should fall. Then let us go forth."
They didn't even hesitate.
They actively choose to turn around and fight. And the text tells us they performed every command with exactness. Now, what's fascinating here is how this ties into a theological concept known as Nephi's freedom thesis.
Okay, unpack that for us. What is that?
It's a recurring conditional promise found throughout the Book of Mormon, which essentially establishes that keeping the commandments with exactness leads to prospering and deliverance in the Promised Land. It is basically the spiritual law of gravity for their civilization.
Okay, wait. Exact obedience. I have to stop you there and push back on this a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
Because when we talk about 14-year-olds following military and religious orders with exactness into a combat zone, that rings some serious modern alarm bells for me.
That's a very fair point.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds dangerously close to brainwashed child soldiers or some kind of intense religious cult where independent thought is punished. How is this different from just blind robotic programming?
That is a vital distinction to make, and it's a very common critique if we look at it through a modern lens without understanding the mechanics. But we have to look at the context of what exactness actually meant for them, both spiritually and tactically.
Break that down.
Well, God's ultimate goal, according to the theology of this text, isn't just to have us do what is right. It's to have us choose to do what is right. He doesn't want his children to become trained, unthinking, obedient pets.
Right, that defeats the whole purpose of agency.
Exactly. The exactness of the Stripling Warriors was a conscious, deliberate choice made in a high-stakes environment. Remember, Helaman asked them what they wanted to do. They weren't forced into the shield wall. They elected to form it.
And mechanically speaking, on an ancient battlefield, exact obedience isn't just some spiritual metaphor. It is the literal mechanism of survival.
Absolutely it is.
Ancient warfare was all about shield walls and unit cohesion. If you are terrified and you break formation and run, the wall shatters, the enemy breaks through, and your entire unit gets slaughtered. Exact obedience meant holding the line when every single biological instinct was screaming at you to run away.
Precisely. Their exactness was tactical discipline fueled by profound spiritual conviction. And we can contrast this conscious discipline with what modern commentary often calls the cafeteria approach to obedience.
The cafeteria approach. I love that analogy. You take a little bit of this rule, maybe skip that commandment over there because it's socially inconvenient right now, grab a side of this doctrine, but you totally ignore the main course.
Exactly. You pick and choose which principles to follow based on your own comfort. But the theology argues that this cafeteria approach leaves you spiritually and, in their case, physically vulnerable.
Because there's a hole in the shield wall.
Right. The Stripling Warriors didn't pick and choose. They performed every word of command with exactness because they understood that exact, unified obedience was the key to accessing the divine power they needed to survive an impossible situation.
Okay, so they turn back, they engage in this ferocious, bloody battle alongside Antipas's weary troops, and Helaman is understandably terrified for his young boys. The battle finally ends, and Helaman starts walking the field, taking a casualty report of his 2,060 young soldiers.
The aftermath.
Yeah, and the numbers he discovers are staggering. During the fighting, 200 of these teenagers had fainted from sheer blood loss. Every single one of them had received many wounds. But the number of dead, 0. Not a single one of the 2,060 died.
It is a stunning, unprecedented, astonishing military victory. But if we are going to look closely and honestly at this text, we have to address the profoundly complex, bittersweet reality of that battle's aftermath.
Yeah, we can't ignore the rest of the chapter.
No, because there is a heavy, sobering caveat right there in the very same chapter that completely shatters the triumphalist narrative.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is the detail that brings this ancient history crashing right into our modern lives. Because while all 2,060 Stripling Warriors survived, in that exact same battle, on that exact same day, 1,000 of their Nephite brothers in arms did die.
1,000.
1,000 seasoned soldiers, men who also had wives praying for them, children waiting for them, and faith of their own, perished in the mud that day.
It is a jarring paradox. You have the ultimate miracle sitting right next to ultimate devastation.
And how do we, as people trying to navigate life today, react to that? I mean, how do the families of those 1,000 fallen Nephite soldiers feel when they hear the astonishing news about the 2,060 teenagers who were miraculously spared without a single fatality?
It's so hard to wrap your head around.
Put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
You are sitting in your community, or today maybe you're scrolling through social media, and you see someone celebrating the exact miracle you've been desperately crying out for.
Right.
A cancer going into remission, a pregnancy after years of agonizing infertility, a loved one finally overcoming an addiction. And your loved one didn't get that miracle. You were just left staring at the ceiling asking, why not me?
Right.
Why did God save their boy, but not mine?
It is arguably one of the most difficult, painful questions we face in the entire human experience. And to be clear, the theological texts don't offer a cheap bumper sticker answer to human suffering.
Well, they don't.
But they do offer a profound synthesis of faith and reality. Deep scriptural analysis suggests that true faith, at its absolute core, is not dependent on outcomes.
Which is an incredibly tough pill to swallow. Faith, not dependent on outcomes. We are so wired to view faith as like this cosmic vending machine, you know? I put in the exact obedience, I pull the lever, and I get the miracle out.
Right, we want it to be transactional, but it requires a massive paradigm shift. When we hear about the miracles of others while we are suffering, the natural, very human temptation is to feel resentment, or to dismiss their miracle entirely as just a mathematical coincidence just to protect our own hearts.
Which is a very natural defense mechanism.
It is, but the theology argues that hearing about someone else's miracle should actually serve as proof. It's evidence that God is still active in the universe. He is still a God of miracles. He is still capable of wielding miraculous power, and therefore, he is still worthy of our absolute unwavering trust, even, and perhaps especially, when we cannot see the end from the beginning in our own lives.
Wow. So instead of letting someone else's answered prayer breed jealousy or bitterness, it can actually serve as the fuel that sustains our trust that God is still in the details, even if his timing or his will for us looks completely different than it did for the person sitting next to us.
Yes. And we see this exact reaction in the text. The remaining Nephite army didn't resent the survival of the Stripling Warriors. The text explicitly says that the preservation of these youth was a source of joy to our whole army.
They were happy for them.
Exactly. Amidst their own profound grief for their 1,000 fallen brothers, they recognized the miraculous power of God at work in these young men, and it gave them hope that God had not abandoned them.
When you combine that gritty reality of inexperienced teenagers with the trauma-forged faith of their mothers, and then place it alongside the agonizing complexity of who survives a battle and who doesn't, it completely changes how we look at our own personal conflicts.
It really does. It becomes a narrative rich with applications for how we navigate the battlefields of our own lives today.
So as you are listening to this deep dive right now, I want you to really think about the friction we've uncovered today. When you are facing your own overwhelming battles, how are you operating? Are you utilizing that cafeteria approach we talked about? Just picking and choosing which principles to apply when it's socially or personally convenient?
Yeah.
Or are you digging deep, trusting the teachings of your mentors and the commandments of God with a kind of exactness, that deliberate, conscious discipline that actually accesses divine power?
And as you ponder that, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, drawn from a completely different ancient narrative in our sources today, the story of the woman of Shunem from the Old Testament.
Oh, I love this connection.
When the prophet Elisha came to her town, she didn't magically recognize him by sight. There was no halo, no photographs to reference. Instead, she had to listen carefully to his words. And more importantly, he had to actively invite him into her home.
She had to bring him in.
She had to literally construct a physical space for him to stay in order to build a relationship with him and recognize that he was a man of God.
She couldn't just casually observe him from afar. She had to make room for the message.
Exactly. She made deliberate space. And the challenge for you is this. When you are in the chaotic middle of your own fierce battles, feeling entirely outnumbered and overwhelmed, are you actively making room in your house, your mind, your schedule, your heart for the voices of faithful mentors, modern prophets, and righteous mothers?
That is such a good question.
Because it is only by actively making that space, by listening deeply and obeying with exactness, that you will be able to recognize divine deliverance when it finally arrives.
It all comes down to cutting through the noise. Just like we had to strip away the pop culture superhero myths today to see the true, gangly, unshakable teenagers holding the line on that battlefield, we have to strip away our own modern distractions to see exactly where God is moving in our lives right now. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep making room in your house, and we'll catch you next time.